couldn't accept the reality. Am I actually going to go on a rubber boat and cross the Aegean with 60 people to seek asylum in Europe?
I don't care the color of your skin, I don't care your ethnicity. Please cook my food, but at least respect my roots.
To come here, navigating bureaucracy, racism, language barriers, taboos and stigmas, and then rebuild your life is by itself a success. For protesting, I was arrested and tortured. I traveled across the Aegean Sea, through the Calais camp and on to the UK.
We did not choose for our countries to become so unsafe that even the deadly sea offered a better prospect.
I am Hassan Akkad, a filmmaker, photographer, and refugee from Syria.
I'm Asma Khan, a restaurateur, entrepreneur, and activist. I don't want to know how many Michelin stars a restaurant has. I want to know how they treat their staff, the diversity in their workforce. I want to shake up unfair social hierarchies and elevate women.
I've witnessed both extremes of humanity, the worst in Syria's prisons, and the best in the people I worked with as a hospital cleaner during the coronavirus pandemic.
Just as Hassan uses his camera, I use food as a storytelling tool to foster equality and combat injustice. The whole point of having an all-female cafe was it should be like an oasis. Food is not just about what you eat, it's about nourishment and healing your soul. I'm excited to speak with Hassan about our journeys, how to cultivate community and make this world a fairer place to live in.
Join us in Studio B Unscripted.
So Hassan, tell me, I want to start off with the Syrian story first. What politicized you?
I wasn't always political because it wasn't an option, you know? And growing up in Turkey, I didn't have a voice because you have to go by what they tell you to do. Now, when the Arab Spring started in Tunisia, and naturally it found itself in Syria, I was living a very comfortable life, but I could not condone what the Syrian regime was doing and dealing with protesters. So 10 years ago, when these schools in Dara scribbled, people want the downfall of the regime on the walls of their school. There was an uprising, people started protesting, I got involved, and my role was small. I was protesting, but I was also trying to document protests to show the world what's happening in my home country. I got arrested in a protest, and I got treated very badly. So I was tortured, and then I was released, I was sacked as a teacher, and then I was arrested again, and I just couldn't feel safe anymore. There was no way in life that I would have left Damascus. I was having an incredible time, and I never thought that I would ever be a refugee because before that, we've had Lebanese refugees, we've had Iraqi refugees, we even had Palestinian refugees, but I never thought that would be one day. But then you're faced with this decision, you either leave or you die. Now, I have a question for you. You have PhD in law, but then you turned to be a cook. And since coming to London, you've been using your platform to platform other voices. I'm so interested in that, tell me.
I think I was always driven with this need to be useful, to play a role, to play a part. You know, my father always would tell me, you know, you're very privileged, you're by birth, you must leave a legacy, you must do something. And when the day is ending, you must feel that I did something for someone. You know, my father, very Sufi philosophy, really kind of, you know, that was part of my DNA and I felt it. And when I was doing law, and a lot of people who are watching this who are South Asian will understand this, you be lawyer or you be doctor. Whereas, like, you hear this your whole life. And I thought, you know, this will please my parents. It'll make my new strange husband, because I had an arranged marriage, so I was trying to impress him as well. I thought, yeah, great. You know, I study law and everyone will think I'm so smart and they'll all love me. It didn't kind of work out that way because I realized that I was so soulless, rootless, hollow in this country. I felt bereft. And I remember my first winter in Cambridge, touching the bark of this very bare, raw tree. And I felt this was me. I will never have a spring. The tree will never have a spring. I had to cook to survive, to live. I know that sounds very extreme, but I didn't feel I could live. I felt so cut off. I couldn't really go home because there's so much shame to leave a marriage and go back. I knew the only way I could go home was to cook. But, talking of journeys, I know so many stories of people making these journeys across. But I have to say, and I'm probably very ashamed to admit, it's the first time I actually met someone who has made this journey. How was it?
So, to give a bit of a context, when I left Syria, I did not want to come to Europe. There's this misconception in America and Europe that Arab men or Muslim men are told from the cradle, go to Europe, go to the West.
Yes.
And it's not true. Even when I left, I stayed in the regions. But wherever I went, there was an expiry date on my ID. And that always made me so anxious. Because I knew that there was no way that I could go back home, but I cannot settle somewhere where there's an expiry date on my ID. And I am in pursuit of a new home. So it was 2015. It was the peak of the refugee crisis in Europe. And my cousin had fled also. He fled persecution in Damascus, and my best friend also fled. So we made a decision to travel together. And we found ourselves in Izmir, in Turkey. And I couldn't accept the reality. There was this denial during the whole time. Like, am I actually going to go on a rubber boat and cross the Aegean with 60 people to seek asylum in Europe? When I was a teenager listening to Eminem, I never expected that this would happen. Like, literally, because this is what you see in films. This is not going to happen to me. And then, so we went on a boat. The smugglers lied to us, as they do to everyone. And our boat sank because there were 63 people, including children and women. We got picked up by the Turkish Coast Guards. We were sent back. And we tried the next day. So we made it to Greece. And then we trekked. Everyone who was with us wanted to go to Germany or Sweden, which is back then was easier. But then I wanted to come to Britain. So I got to Calais. It's a small town in northern France. And then after 2 months of trying, I finally made it here in September 2015. So yeah, it was a crazy journey.
An incredible journey, yes, yes.
I'm going to move away from the journey a bit, and I want to talk about food, because I'm from Damascus, and Damascene food is incredible.
Yes,
My dad even had a pizza restaurant, and you are a cook. So how do you use your food as a storytelling mechanism?
It's very, very important for me that you acknowledge the honor that is due to my food. Because what has happened a lot in the West is that ethnic food, culture and food is separated. I don't care the color of your skin, I don't care your ethnicity. Please cook my food, but at least respect my roots. And the problem is that a lot of people see ethnic food as cheap and cheerful. Oh, this is like... So one of the things that I was very against is that, you break bread on my table, sit down, listen to my stories. I want to tell you about the women in my family graveyard, the ones who taught me these dishes. I have the right to be respected. Food is part of our DNA. You and I both understand this, that birth, death, marriages, food is there. And I studied law, I did a PhD, and how there are people in families who say, oh, look at her, not using her law degree. I use it every day. I use the skills of advocacy to use through food as my conversation. Food is my bridge between me and my host nation. And you and I came to this country for different reasons. I came here as a new bride, full of hope and, excitement, with suitcases full of trousseau that my mother had collected for years, all my beautiful handmade, silken clothes and jewelry. I'd come here to start a new life. So our journeys were different, but, it didn't take me long to understand that, what I left, I needed to find a way to tell the story so that someone who looked like me, someone who looks like you, We have a story. Don't separate us from our food, our stories, and then call us names and put labels on us. This is the one thing about labels that, people use the lowest category when they describe the outsider. I want you to explain to me how this is a problem and what you think.
It's dehumanizing when you label people. When I did my journey, I filmed it. And the reason why I filmed it is because I read articles in British tabloids describing us as cockroaches and invaders and coming here to steal jobs. So that is very dehumanizing and it's very problematic. And the reason why I filmed my journey and it was made into a film which millions of people watched it is because I wanted to tell the story. I wanted people to walk in my footsteps. The difference between a migrant and refugee is purely a choice. When you're a refugee, you were forced to flee. You were persecuted for your sexual orientation, for your political views, for your religion. When you're a migrant, you were not forced. You made a decision to leave for reasons to study, to family unification, better life. And an asylum seeker is someone who is applying for refugee status to become a refugee. Now, the last 4 years have taught me that there is such hierarchy in the refugee world itself. Because I'll tell you about Britain as an example. Us Syrian refugees are on top of that hierarchy. We are seen as the most acceptable ones. And there are two reasons, in my opinion. A, because most of us are white passing. And B, Britain is less implicit in Syria than it is in Afghanistan and Iraq. Before the pandemic, if you're a British citizen who wants to fly to Afghanistan, you are warned against all types of travel to Afghanistan. However, it's deemed safe enough to deport Afghans back to Afghanistan. So I try a lot to speak about these hierarchies, because I do not want to be treated better than someone else just because I am a bit familiar than he is.
No, and this thing, you're absolutely right. Britain doesn't have the best, history of leaving any place without sowing the seeds of death. But it's interesting what you're saying about this, the hierarchy. But it is so sad because, I felt different, and I didn't fall into any of these categories. And this is why I have an all-migrant, kitchen. These are women who started life as nannies. But I am very proud. I have a kitchen, an all-female kitchen. The average age of women cooking in my kitchen is 50, and they're all migrants. Because we claim back this earth. You don't ask me whether I have the right to be here. I have the right to be here, and I will feed you the best biryani. Come and sit on my table.
Asma, you and I have gained attention because we were both in a documentary. People know about us from social media and stuff. But I'm always aware that this reinforces the rhetoric, the good immigrant rhetoric.
Yeah.
The problem with the good immigrant rhetoric is that we focus on individual cases, but we forget the bigger cause, so the bigger picture. So if I clean a hospital, then I get attention. If a migrant in France climbs on a building and rescues a kid from the balcony, he gets attention. So it makes us feel like we will only accept you if you go above and beyond to help. While in my opinion, to come here navigating bureaucracy, racism, language barriers, taboos and stigmas, and then rebuild your life from scratch is by itself a success. So we shouldn't be judging who's good and who's bad only because they got some attention.
No, I think that this is a huge problem because I think we are all paying the price for a very, very divisive, extremely xenophobic and racist Brexit campaign. And that literally released the genie from the bottle of racism. And the fact that, you hear stories, it's very close to where I lived, where people had put graffiti on the Polish center, really nasty graffiti, against the Poles who flew with the RAF in the Second World War. People's memories are incredibly short, incredibly short. People from, South Asia fought in the First World War and the Second World War. You still have Gurkhas, from Nepal, who are part of the British Army. Yet this whole thing of, everybody was put, in the same bracket. And the hatred and Islamophobia That was really deeply troubling. We were actually giving out food during the Brexit debate. After Brexit, we had a supper club, series of supper clubs where, we had Arab, cuisine, Polish cuisine. We even had, Irish, British cuisine, because we are all together, where we celebrated the fact that, especially in London, this is a city of migrants. When you look around here in these beautiful buildings, these are modern, but the base of these buildings is the blood of my people. The wealth of this country was built on colonialism, on exploitation, on slavery. This is something that is not taught in schools.
Yeah,
and no one understands. When they look at me, they see a brown accented, Muslim. Ask me why I'm here. I will ask you what you were doing for 200 years in my country. Yeah.
You know what I do when I feel homesick? When I miss Syria, I go to the British Museum. Because there's this entire section full of Syrian artifacts.
No, I don't think it's that, it's not as simple. For me, it is about the fact that in schools, there is absolutely no, you're not taught any colonial history. You're not taught about the empire. And so we are, in this situation. Anyway, let's get some questions from our audience.
Hi, so my question was to Asma. How did you move from your front room, serving people in your front room, to opening a restaurant and beginning spreading your social message on the massive platform that you have now?
I'm very lucky. I think that, I feel very blessed. I know that this is not something that can happen to everybody. It was never planned. I didn't want to open a restaurant. I didn't have the money to open a restaurant. And also, I never saw anybody who looked like me, who sounded like me, in food media, in the press, anywhere. So, I never even thought it was possible that I could have become a restaurateur. But, I was lucky. I got breaks, from people. A lot of people helped me. But the biggest thing is I stand on the shoulders of my team. The women who were the nannies who came in and worked with me in my kitchen, in my home, and helped serve people in my own house, today are still in my restaurant. They wear chef's coat. They have been there with me throughout. Yes, I am the face that people see of Darjeeling Express, but I am standing on the shoulder of giants, my team. And this is so important. Collaborate, build networks. And, yes, my network is all female, but build networks even with men, like-minded people. Our power comes as a collective. We will never succeed if you're alone. And this is my story, I reached out and I embraced other people, and that's how I got where I am. So let's hear the second question.
Hassan, you were earlier talking about how there's this misconception that all refugees or migrants want to come to America or the UK. And I just wanted to ask you where you think this misconception comes from. Ask you both, actually.
This prejudice doesn't come from nowhere. Obviously, the media plays a massive role in this. Tabloids who are always running articles about migrants and refugees and often exaggerating the issue. So I'll give you an example. Less than 1% of the refugees around the world are in Britain. Still, cover page after cover page after cover page talking about refugees and addressing it as if this is a massive issue. It's politicians and media who are exaggerating the issue. And that's why people have this misconception. Well, if you ask me, if our countries were not so troubled by wars and famines and crises, I would have loved to stay in Syria. And I miss my food, too.
I also think that there is... these are the people who don't have votes. They're the people who cannot actually hit back in some ways. They cannot dispute facts. You put this label, migrants and refugees. They're a very disparate group. And, they don't even speak the same language. So the problem is that, they cannot unify, and then they cannot actually fight back. And so it's such an easy target. You hit the weakest because they cannot come back with a story, with their side of the story. We never hear that. Till people like Hassan have got involved. History is always written by the victor. And this is, again, a reflection of that what is happening in this conversation is the powerful are telling you the story. And those who do not have power right now cannot actually tell their story. And this is so important that we give the space for them to tell their story.
Exactly. Let's take another question.
Namaste, I'm Sameep from Nepal. I've heard a lot of stories about Nepalese people migrating to Europe and the US from Nepal in a similar manner as portrayed by Hassan and also by other people in his documentary. But the movie is generally based on economic instabilities rather than political instabilities. But looking at the news and looking at the general media, we can see that political migrants and political refugees are often seen in a more positive light than the economic migrants. So what's your opinion on this dichotomy?
Yes, I do agree with you that economic migrants are often demonized in the media, and the focus is always on the political refugees. I think it's unfair, and I think it shouldn't be that way. I think anyone who's trying to live a better life somewhere else should not be demonized for it. And who decides whether you should be accepted in your new society or not, or whether you should be given another chance or not? And it's very easy for sometimes for people in the West to say, well, you've come here, while not understanding the conditions in the migrant's home country. How long does it take to queue outside a bakery to get bread? Or how long does it take to walk and get fresh water? And not understanding how hard it is to get a job. It is frustrating that sometimes people are judgmental of economic migrants, but it can be combated by speaking out about it, speaking out against it and addressing the issue.
Well, thank you very much for that. And let's move on to the next question, please.
I was really interested in what Asma was saying about the tendency of UK society, well, the West, I suppose, to separate food out from the stories and the culture. In many ways, actually, the same as what Hassan was saying about the British Museum, that, you know, we take the artifacts and we put them into boxes and we look at them and we think how lovely, but they've got nothing to do with the people from whose culture they come. And I'm just wondering if you could talk a little more, Asma, about the ways in which your food activism, I suppose, serves to make those links stronger again and visible.
Thank you very much. This is what I want to dedicate the rest of my life to. I want people to understand that, you know, there are stories with every dish, there are stories with every human being. And, you know, I began my entire, food business, if you can call it a business, I call it a social enterprise, from my home, around my dining table. I served people personally. I cleaned their tables. And I presented each dish, and I talked about the symbolism of each dish, why it was so important for me, what was so significant about the ingredients, the names. But I also wanted to acknowledge, which is now very, it has led to a lot of division in India, the fact that Indian food was actually, an amalgamation of loads of people. The Portuguese got potatoes, the British got cauliflower, and, a lot of the things that we take for granted is Indian. Even samosa is not Indian. It was got in by, people who came to court in Delhi. They arrived and presented them the samosas. So this lack of acknowledgement of the contributions of others, I also describe this because a lot of Indians themselves don't understand that, this is not. There's too much xenophobia when it comes to food. People are building walls around food. I present you food as I present a meandering river. It will get there, it flows, it has shades, it has light and dark, it has both. And, conversations about food will allow you to have conversations about more difficult things. And this is what I try to do. Let me use food as a conversation, but it is really about activism, because this is not where I want to make my money. And this is not where I want to impress you. I don't want to have this glory. I want you to understand me better. That's my main aim. Thank you, everybody, for asking all these questions. All very, very interesting. A lot of white feminists don't get me. I can be deeply rooted in all the positive things about my culture. I can still raise my voice against patriarchy.
As a refugee, I was always at the receiving end of humanitarian work or advocacy. We should be doing the work, you know? I don't want someone to advocate on my behalf. I want to advocate for myself. Offer me the tools, give me the training, and I can do it.
If a male chef had touched a female outside the kitchen, he would be in jail. Somehow, in hospitality, we have protected these men who are violent and bully.